Greetings and welcome back to another check-in chat. And this one was triggered by a few days ago, somebody had posted a comment on an essay of mine on Substack. And it was actually an older essay. It was first published on Substack in April 2023. But prior to that, it had been published on my own homepage in November of 2022 and had been written several months before, earlier in 2022. The essay in question is called "The Natives Are Restless, Life in the Existential Zone." And I'll put a link to the essay on Substack below. And so actually quite an apt title, "The Natives Are Restless." So it brought my attention back to that earlier essay from a couple of years ago. And the essay opens with a quote from the ex-Czech president Václav Havel. And the quote is, "As the interpretation of reality by the power structure, ideology is always subordinated ultimately to the interests of the structure. Therefore, it has a natural tendency to disengage itself from reality, to create a world of appearances, to become ritual." Václav Havel writing in his book, The Power of the Powerless. Now, for me, that quote is very powerful and very relevant. And what Václav Havel was saying there is that there's this contestation between the power structure and reality. And ideology gets kind of mixed up in there and lost in there, in that power overtakes ideology. And although ideology is promoted as the reason, the motivating factor, it's always subordinated ultimately to the interest of the structure, or the power structure. So an ideology gets presented to the masses, let's say, by the ruling power structure, but that ideology is subordinated, power is more important. And so because of that disengagement, there's a tendency, says Havel, to disengage from reality. And therefore it creates a world of appearances. And that becomes ritual. And I think what we're seeing today is a lot of ritual. And I've talked a lot about what I call the theatre of the absurd, in that the external events being presented to us are increasingly absurd, this disengagement from reality. And yet we're trying to keep a hold on some form of reality. And ideology gets mixed in there, but really it's a power play. And this takes us further and further from reality. I mentioned before that, again, the play between the sacred and the profane. Ritual plays into both. As we know, the sacred order has a lot of rituals, a lot of sacred processes, moves through ritual. It gives it structure. It gives a kind of substance to the process of the sacred order. But at the same time, the profane has a lot of rituals. But often the rituals in the profane world, or the profane realm, is a kind of inversion. It's a parody. Things get turned upside down. And that's deliberate. That's the deliberate part of the ritual of the inversion, of the disengagement from reality. So when we see things around us being presented and we know it's not quite right, we know it's not real, that's part of the inversion of the ritual of the profane. And that's going on increasingly. But the thing is, it gets presented as reality when we know it's not. And then there's a tendency to want to push back against it by saying this can't be real. So we want to protest against it, to revolt against it. But of course it's not real. So there's the revolt against the inversion, the parody of the profane. Personally speaking, I don't think the profane, the inversion of the profane, deserves a protest or a pushback. We have to accept it, knowing that it's deliberately this inverted parody. So why it's a kind of unreal. So why protest against the unreal? It's as if we're trying to say we think it's real and we don't accept it. We should rather be understanding that these things being pushed upon us in the external world right now are increasingly the unreal of the inverted parody. I'd just like to read from the opening, or the second paragraph in this essay, because again, when I reread it after all this time, it kind of struck me again. Especially the first line struck me. The second paragraph goes, quote, "The very act of living a sane life has become a revolutionary act. It is revolutionary in that mental, emotional, and psychological clarity is a rebellion against the brain fog of the consensus status quo. And yet, without such clarity of perception and insight, we are in danger of becoming redundant in an environment of ever-increasing meaninglessness. An undeclared nihilism has taken root within the circuitry of the human condition and is spreading as a silent contagion. This is now the maelstrom of the times that faces so many of us. The natives are restless, and this is life in the existential zone." End quote. So, as we're seeing now across the world, across Europe, across Britain right now, and of course in the US and elsewhere across the world, it's been happening in many countries. The recent ousting of the Prime Minister in Bangladesh has been a recent cause. The riots in the UK. I mean, I don't really want to focus on all these aspects. There's many of them. But what it's shown is that the natives are restless. And this is an encroaching existential zone because it's very difficult to grasp any sense of tangible meaning. There's a disorientation going on. And this is because, as I said in the opening line, the very act of living a sane life has become a revolutionary act. The main way that we can, if you want to use the word revolt against the system, is not to get mentally, emotionally, psychologically pulled into it so we lose the clarity. We become part of that nihilistic, abstract, meaninglessness, disorientation. The best way to respond or to have the revolt is to keep the sane life, to keep the balance, to keep in the sacred order, as opposed to the profane, inverted parody. And so, as I mentioned here, without the clarity of perception and insight, we become more redundant because we're falling into the parody of meaninglessness, of inverted ritual. And that's very easy to pull us in. So as I say, it's as if we're stepping into an existential zone of our own making. And as this is being wrapped around us, and it's causing us restlessness, it's causing us physical revolt, it's causing us to kind of engage in that brain fog, because as I mentioned before, all the news now coming out, it's increasingly difficult to discern of what news has any validity. And that's the brain fog. And so that's the disengagement from reality, the world of appearances, which is a consequence of this power play. And the power play is disengaging from reality and involving us in it. So if you want to be a revolutionary, a true revolutionary, then it's living a sane life, disengaged from the parody. So saying that, as always, stay well, stay healthy, stay sane, and be grounded. Until next time, cheers.